welcome to another amazing episode of Say It Online, where we help digital agency owners stop just randomly shouting into the void and start communicating meaningfully and effectively in this digital age. I'm your host, Say Gabriel, and this episode was brought to you by our sponsor, Nancy Content. If you're sick of conversion content being a huge pain in your agency's butt, especially websites, campaigns, etc., let's talk. With the smoothest content process ever, a team of unbelievably skilled and organized content strategists, and years of subcontracting experience, Anansi is looking to make your life as a digital agency owner unbelievably easier. Just head, if you're interested, to anansicontent.com, that's ANANSI content.com, and hit Let's Talk. And now, without further ado, here's our episode. Hello, guys. Today, we have an extra special guest, Jantsch, on the show. So John is a marketing consultant, speaker, and author of a book that you may have already heard of, which is Duct Tape Marketing. Also the author of several other books, Duct Tape Selling, The Commitment Engine, SEO for Growth, The Referral Engine, and he is the founder of the Duct Tape Marketing Consultant Network. Now, his latest book, which we're going to be talking about today, The Self-Reliant Entrepreneur, 366 Daily Meditations to Feed Your Soul and Grow Your Business, is a daily reminder to entrepreneurs that a better you makes a better business, which is just something I can really get behind, gets me really, really excited. John's also been podcasting since 2005. Yes, 14 years, with thousands of guests and hundreds of guest appearances under his belt. That is pretty darn impressive. I think he might have even kept a weekly schedule throughout that. Pretty insane. I am super, super excited to chat with you today. Welcome, John.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for that lovely introduction.
Awesome. It's not often that we get someone who is a 5 or 6 time published author on here and household name in some of the marketing world. But hopefully will become more of a norm in the future. But before we dive into all of that special sauce, why don't you take a few minutes to just, share a little bit about you personally? How did you get to be where you are today?
Well, I'm going to go all the way back to college. When I graduated from college, I took a job with an ad agency for about 5 years, and at some point, pretty quickly decided I needed to do my own thing. That was like 25, more than that, 27 years ago. I jumped into doing my own thing. I knew I could hustle work. I didn't really have a plan other than I knew I wanted to have kind of the independence of finding my own way. And at some point, pretty quickly, I realized, I took pretty much any kind of project somebody said they'd pay me for. But at some point, I realized I really liked working with small business owners, but they were very challenging. I had been taught kind of the traditional client service in marketing, world, and it just didn't apply to small business owners. They had the same needs, but certainly not the same budget or even attention span. So I decided that in order to work with small business owners, I was going to have to create a very systematic approach to marketing where I could walk in and say, here's what I'm going to do. Here's what you're going to do. Here are the results we hope to get. And here's what it costs. To my delight, I discovered that in trying to solve my frustration, I tapped into what is still today one of the greatest frustrations with small business owners. It is very hard to buy marketing services as a small business, and increasingly harder because everybody's selling a piece of the pie. There's, it's gotten more complex. There are more, online channels. And so the fact that somebody was going to, create a system that started with strategy, had a set price, was kind of music to their ears. And that's really was the genesis of the name Duct Tape Marketing. I decided if I was going to start writing about this and selling maybe even a course online, I had to give it more of a brand kind of name. And so I just came up with Duct Tape Marketing because it felt like the perfect metaphor for what it's like to be in a small business in many cases. And the name appealed and resonated with a lot of small business owners. I did start, as you mentioned, my podcast in 2005 and blogging in 2003 and, selling an actual course probably in the 2004, 5, 6 range, which was a bit of pioneer days in that kind of world. But that also started attracting other independent marketing consultants who kind of had the same feeling like, yeah, I want to work with small business owners, but it's hard. So I developed the Duct Tape Marketing Consultant Network, and now we have about 150 consultants and small agencies around the world that really at any given time are working with thousands of small business owners installing the duct tape marketing system.
Honestly, as somebody who is a huge fan of systems and systematic approaches to delivering value and growth. I'm just going to put this out there. I'm a Canadian. We have a big thing about duct tape. It is like magic here. We use it for everything. So I immediately clued in to the duct tape marketing, the kind of actionable, practical aspect of it. I think that a lot of us, not just Canadians, can really relate to.
Well, it's funny. A lot of Americans do too. But my book, Duct Tape Marketing, has been translated into about 14 languages now, and the love of all things duct tape doesn't quite translate into a lot of other languages. So they came up with some catchy titles like "Marketing that is low cost and effective" is kind of how it translates in Portuguese, at least.
All right. Well, clear is the new clever is a saying that we have here at Anansi. So they're definitely leaning into that. That makes a lot of sense. But duct tape marketing has been around for a long time, and the new work that you've just published is a little bit different. We'll get into that.
Substantially
but for our
so.
listeners who aren't familiar with it, in a few sentences, would you mind sharing with us a little bit about what your new book is called and what it's about?
Sure. It's the Self-Reliant Entrepreneur, and the subtitle says a lot. 366 daily meditations to feed your soul and grow your business. So the format of the book is a daily, every day, January 1st, January 2nd, January 3rd, you come and you have a new page. I anchored the themes and the concepts in the book in mid-19th century literature. So every day starts with what I think is some of the greatest entrepreneurial writing from people like Emerson, Thoreau, Alcott, Margaret Fuller. Then, because I have owned my own business for 30 years, I felt like I could sort of riff on and contextualize a lot of what those themes meant to me. And then I leave you every day with a challenge question. So in a lot of ways, well, certainly the book is not a how-to book like my previous books is. I like to call it more of a why-to book. But it's really more of a practice. I mean, it's meant to be read 2 minutes a day. It doesn't mean you can't jump around and read a whole bunch at one time, but it's meant to kind of be maybe fit into an already established morning routine or something where you've done some meditation or journaling or something like that, and just kind of give you something to really ponder that's all about. I mean, it's certainly about you as a person, but in the context of maybe your entrepreneurial journey, whatever that looks like.
And I love the way that you just said that this is, more than just a book. This is a practice. This is something that rather than kind of sitting down and reading, taking notes, and then starting to kind of apply, I'm hearing that the very format of the book encourages you to kind of pause, absorb a smaller amount, and kind of go deeper rather than wider in terms of applying it, which, considering how much I love how practical your approaches are, I think this practice element really ties it together for me. But, I'm just going to call it out, right? Not in a negative way at all. That the approach here does revolve around topics, meditation, mindfulness, inner peace, the meaning of success, and the essence of life. For me personally, these are things that are actually very, very tied in to my whole life and therefore my business life. But I think that for a lot of people, these are topics that are more commonly associated with spiritual practices rather than, business practices. So I'm curious, why this book now? How does this book relate to your previous ones?
Well, I think we've all got so much access to how-to information. I mean, anything you want to do. Like I always joke when I'm in my garage trying to fix something. It's like, oh, I need to fix the grill on a 1983, Mini Cooper, S, blah blah blah, and there's gonna be a video on how to do it. And I think that what's missing for a lot of folks really is the mindset, that the intentional kind of work on ourselves. You mentioned it in the intro that I think build a better you is how you build a better business, and so often the better you part gets kind of extracted from the like everyday craziness of trying to run a business. And what I feel like has happened is that so many entrepreneurs are, even entrepreneurs that you look at and you think, oh, wow, they've made it. They're really living the dream. I think that this entrepreneurial journey is sucking the life out of them. It's certainly sucking the joy, out of a lot of what it means to own and build a business. And so that's why I, this book now, I guess, is because it's the book that I've been sort of writing in my head for 20 years.
I really like that answer. And I also really I want to go back to something that you said at the beginning, which is that if there are a lot of how-to books out there, this is a why-to book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that it's nourishing your mindset. And I know that at least in the business communities I'm a part of, mindset is a constant conversation. You want to take your prices from the 3K range to above 10K for a project. First, you have to shift your mindset.
Yep.
Only then can you even shift your audience or something like that. But this is a little bit of a different approach to mindset than I've seen in the past. I'm curious, in your own words, what are some of kind of the more practical applications? And what I mean by that is, how does the mindset kind of self-reflection that this engenders, how does that contribute to your overall kind of entrepreneurial journey and well-being?
Well, I think the biggest goal of the book for me, and what's happened, of course, is now I have people, asking me for, where's the workbook? Where are the exercises, right? For me, the biggest thing that, it's sort of ironic. I mean, this is a book telling you how to be self-reliant. Well, nobody can tell you how to do that. I mean, that's really on you. But to me, probably the biggest goal where I feel like if I've succeeded in this work is helping more people realize that we have to let go of the stuff that we can't control. And that's most of it.
Oh my gosh, yes. Are you saying that directly to me or something? I don't know.
Because the only things we can control are, how we show up and how we respond to everything that happens. And I think if we got to the point where we focused and were completely mindful of those two things, a lot of the other things would take care of themselves, or at least a lot of the stress would go away from what it is that we think we're trying to do. And so in a lot of ways, there are very many practical things, applications, exercises, about trust and curiosity and confidence and mindfulness. I mean, that are really built throughout this book. But it's, again, I hate to shift all the responsibility to the reader, but a lot of it's just saying, hey, start paying attention to this stuff and make it a habit to pay attention to this stuff. And I think that you're going to find a year from now, you're a different person.
I think that's really powerful. And I certainly am no stranger to reflecting the work back onto people. I think that's really, we as individuals and as humans, we need to go through personal experience in order to grow. And I think that, we work with quite a few entrepreneurs, mostly in the digital space, but I've worked with many entrepreneurs over the years. And I would say that it's often difficult for us to set aside time for this kind of important self-reflection. And I like the fact that you've kind of turned it into a little bit more of a bite-sized approach here. But I once again, I just want to pull some real gold that I heard from you. And you said you tossed it off so casually, but I really want to make sure that our listeners can pause for a moment on this, just as I'm pausing for a moment on it, which is that in the end, the only things that we can control are how we show up and how we respond. I'm going to repeat that again. The only things we can control are how we show up and how we respond. And mindset allows us to have greater intentionality, awareness, and control over both how we show up and how we respond. And that's something that I have definitely experienced on a personal level. I think that, as you said, John, it's not that we can put in 6 hours on this and rush in the action and all of a sudden be a more awake and more intentional and more mindful person. These are things we do have to do, work on a little bit every day.
Well, and I think the first step really is, I will tell a lot of people that until you start witnessing them and that, your lack of mindfulness, until you start witnessing, oh, wow, I responded in a way that wasn't really that healthy. Until you start seeing that in yourself, you're never going to have the opportunity to actually then make a better choice. And that's the first work we have to do, is we have to start seeing it show up in our life before we can go to work on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this actually flows perfectly into my next question, which are, so what are some of, your own personal challenges or demons that you've kind of faced on your entrepreneurial journey that helped you realize the importance of this or helped you kind of understand how to bring this more into your life?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that when however you call this or frame this or whatever pond you're in, if you get to a level where people are pointing to you, oh, you're the author, you're the expert, you're the celebrity, or whatever it is, people start asking you questions, and my own personal demon is I actually thought they wanted the answers. And I think that
Oh, I can relate to that.
one of the things I've certainly learned is that the need to be right, the need to have the answers, really robs you of a lot of joy, and it's certainly as a leader, say in an organization, it's very disempowering, frankly, to the people that are asking for help or asking for questions. And so, one of the things that's been very hard, humbling, and powerful for me to learn is as a leader to actually, when people come to you and want the answers, that you actually let them decide what the answer is, or let them give you some version of what the answer is. And it is amazingly empowering because they usually have the answer. But you've trained them, or I've trained them in over the years, to just have me give them the answer. And so, a lot of times, I think what happens in that type of environment is, as I said, it's very disempowering, but also it really kind of teaches people that they don't have to, that they don't have the answers, and that they don't have to put in the work to grow themselves.
Yeah. I think well, like many things you mentioned, is quite a powerful realization.
Yeah.
And if I'm understanding you correctly, is that when it comes to things that are a lot more concrete, such as, delivering value in a client service provider relationship or something, there are some kind of practical how-to things that you can look at and follow and et cetera. But when it comes to mindset, things are a little bit more subtle in the sense that there are no clear yes answers.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, like let me see if I can get a little bit closer to the way you put it, which is that ultimately the clearest answers are the ones that you yourself come up with and come to based on observation.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, yes, and I'll tell you the questions that I've started using with clients in particular is, tell me more about that, because so often we make assumptions about things or directions or goals or objectives without really giving the client enough space to articulate what they really want, and that leads to a lot of mistakes. And the other one is, well, what would you do? um, when they say we need to do blah blah blah, and I say, well, what would that look like, or what would you do? So kind of there is sort of a deflect. It's not even deflecting. It's really more of a the answer. Let me help you find it, as opposed to giving it to you.
Yeah, I might be reaching here, but I am perceiving a lot of parallels between this and kind of the journey that I've had to go through in my own business in terms of decentralizing leadership.
Yeah.
Where the analogy that I made is that I'm just playing tennis. People come to me with kind of questions and challenges and problems, and a little bit to some degree, I just have to lob them back. Now, I'm not trying to like hit them or anything. I'm just trying to lob it back into their court because ultimately they already have the power and awareness and knowledge of, in this particular circumstance, often how to take charge in this situation. But in a client circumstance, I'm hearing more that when it comes to kind of their goals or what they want it to look like, if you do that work to kind of lob it back to them a little bit and dig deeper and get more, then you'll be able to serve them better and provide them with more value, because you're getting more of the full picture instead of jumping immediately to the solution that you perceive. Is that what I'm hearing?
Very much so. I mean, it's really easy to assume. I do marketing consulting. It's really easy for me to assume that everybody just wants to grow their business by 15% every year or something, of that nature, when maybe they just want to get home earlier at night, or maybe they just want to be proud of the work that they do in a way that they're not today. And I think if you start having conversations at that level, first off, it allows me to know what I should be focusing on or the direction they want to go. But I think it also I think it also empowers them to then say, yeah, this is, this person gets me, this person, is on my team, as opposed to,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I've just gone out and hired a market, it's really expensive, as opposed to I've invested in somebody who is going to help me get to where I want to get.
That makes a lot of sense. And one analogy that we use a lot, we're big fans of the story brand framework, is that we as service providers are the guide, right? I like to pretend I'm Gandalf, so I always use Gandalf as an example. And really, we're on the same team. Whereas I think that there can sometimes be an assumption or just a tendency to perceive that you have to kind of fight your client because you know what's best for them, or et cetera. And sometimes we do have to set clear boundaries and kind of structures around the way that we help them thrive and succeed. But what I'm hearing from you is to remember that you are on the same team. And one of the ways that you can establish this up front is really to build together the vision of what you want to achieve and spend a lot of time active listening.
Yeah, no question. I have a client that I've had for 100 years. In fact, his father was actually, I'm probably going to give myself in trouble now, but his father was actually the owner of the business. He is, his son has taken it over. And they every month seem to come up with like what I call kind of the kooky idea of the month. and I used to go, no, that's stupid. Maybe not quite like that, but now I tend to go, and what would that do for us? And how do you see that playing out, and let them kind of and after 5 minutes of conversation they're like, that's a really dumb idea, and I'm like, okay, let's move on to the next thing.
Yes. Yes, I've definitely had these kinds of experiences. I think especially for me in the kind of consulting work that I've done, I found that over the years I've tried to just as you say, be like, oh, well, actually, I don't think that's going to work. Do this instead. Yeah. But even though to me it seems like the most efficient approach, it's actually more efficient to work with them, even if it's a little bit more challenging, to work with them to understand, and through that understanding, help them come to the same conclusion.
That's right. Yeah, and who knows? Maybe we don't have all the answers.
Oh, so how dare you suggest that? Don't have all the answers. Definitely don't tell my husband that. No, I'm just kidding. But I would like to take a conversation in a little bit of a different direction, just because there's an aspect that I'm quite curious about. Now, as I don't know if any of our listeners know this, but I'm actually huge literature nerd, and in fact have a degree in English literature.
Okay.
So it really resonated with me that you didn't just pick quotes at random to put in this. Nowhere near random. In fact, they're from a ridiculously limited period, like a very, very specific period. They're carefully selected. So I'm curious, and the term that you use is the transcendentalist writer. Yep. So I'm curious. So number one, what is a transcendentalist writer, and why the work from this period, which for our listeners, if you're not sure, is basically the 1850s?
That's right. So the transcendentalist was a term that was applied to a group of folks that were initially trying to establish some religious reform, and it was held to a pretty tight geographic pocket. It was certainly in the United States, but it was also on the East Coast in the Boston area. And so, many listeners, while they may not know that term, have heard of Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau and Louisa May Alcott, Margaret Fuller. Those were writers that were trying to create some reform, and some of them very overtly, like Emerson and Thoreau. But it was, if you think about what was going on at that given time in America. It was 1850, as you said. We were on the cusp of the Civil War. Women were marching in the streets to get the right to vote. We were trying to abolish slavery. So a lot of people look at that as kind of the first countercultural period in America, where a lot of the writing and literature was very much, hey, maybe it's time to stop listening to our preachers or politicians or even our parents and kind of do our own thing, follow our own heart. So Emerson was actually kicked out of the church that he was a preacher in, because these were seen as such radical ideas. I think today they're seen as very common practical ideas, but at the time, they were sort of, as I say, countercultural, revolutionary. Think for yourself. You don't have to listen to the government and the politicians. I think it happens to be, some of the best writing. This idea of following, that you're endowed with a unique spirit. You need to follow your heart, and nobody else needs to, should be able to tell you, what's right for you. I think it's great advice for entrepreneurs. And so, as I dug into that literature, and frankly, you'll find lots of Pinterest and Instagram, quotes with Thoreau and Emerson. But as I dug into that entire kind of body of work that was written, I discovered that there was the fiction also from that time. So a lot of the books that many of us were asked to read in high school and college, like Little Women and Moby Dick and Scarlet Letter, the protagonist in those work were some of the first times that the protagonist was very, hey, this may cost me, but I have to be true, to who I am. So I think there's a really good reason why that literature has stood the test of time, and I minded and curated it with the entrepreneur in mind, because I think it is, even though they weren't writing for entrepreneurs, I think it's the greatest entrepreneur writing still today.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the things that I love about your choice is that I would say somewhat familiar, certainly not deeply familiar with a lot of these writers and their works, but you have really taken it to and looked at it through a lens that is both came as quite a surprise to me, like quite different from what I expected. But the more I thought about it, the more it made perfect sense. Yeah. I'm really curious though. So how do you think that this period of time, that was the time of lots of kind of upheaval and, as we're talking kind of self-reliance and self-awareness, the rise of those as values, how does that relate to kind of the period that we're in today? Do you think we're in the midst of a similar upheaval? Is this just kind of something that's always going on? I don't know.
I suppose at some level it's always going on, but I think there's no question you can draw some parallels. A lot of historians and researchers talk about the phenomenon of history repeating itself in every fourth generation and things like that. And I think we're definitely I definitely think there are those who would suggest we are maybe almost as politically and culturally divided right now as we were in that time period. Does that make this writing more relevant? Maybe. One of the things that I've always felt is that entrepreneurs, in many cases, are out to solve a wrong, to get rid of some inconvenience. In many ways, I think entrepreneurs have always been a force for good in the world, and really, I think carry a lot of the burden of society in some ways, and so. If I can just like really, really be out there, I think an army of self-reliant entrepreneurs are probably what we really need right now.
Wow, awesome. Well, thank you for digging into that. I definitely do also see some parallels. So I'm curious, I think you've already kind of answered this, but I'm going to ask anyway. Whether or not this period in today's world is that kind of, tense and big things changing and et cetera, that some people may or may not think it is, why does the world need these teachings, these quotes, this experience, this book?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of people, when they think of self-reliance, in fact, if you Google self-reliance, you'll find some websites that'll teach you how to build your own home and, live off the land and, not need anybody. And to me, that's missing a little bit of in fact, it's missing a lot of what this is about. The idea of self-reliance is that I believe that we are all unique. I believe we are all put here for a very specific, unique purpose, or maybe our whole goal in life is to find that and figure out what it is. But there's no question we need each other. And anybody who's built a business knows that they're going to rely on relationships and partnerships and people who introduced, somebody introduced me to you, to be on this show. Yeah. And what I believe that developing a level of trust to follow your own heart, it also, I think it comes hand in hand with a lot more empathy for, what others are doing, for what you're doing, for the fact that you can change your mind, if you decide you want to go another direction or that you're not following your heart. And so, I think that's, to me, that's the part that's so missing right now, is that I don't feel like people appreciate or have enough of gratitude for, how much we need to depend on each other, and maybe in many ways, stop looking at, one of the things, the teachings in the Transcendentalists was, borrowed very heavily from a lot of the Eastern wisdom traditions, and that we're all connected, in some fashion, to each other, to everything in nature. And, if we, don't find our own unique path, but at the same time realize that we're all sort of part of one. And I know I'm going really deep in the spiritual realm here, but I think that's absolutely what we have to do. And I think if we do that, a lot of the ills in the world could be solved.
I mean, just simply put, I agree. But I do think it's an interesting concept that self-reliance actually helps you be more empathetic and connect better to others. And that's something that's really critical in order for us to thrive as individuals and the world to thrive. I'm curious if you could dig into that a little bit more. Like, shoot me down if you disagree.
No.
What are some of the ways?
No, completely agree. One of the biggest things is when you decide that you trust yourself so thoroughly that you want to follow your heart and your path, other people's disagreements, other people's judgments, other people's comparisons just don't matter anymore. And that's where I see a lot of the stress and from comparison and from being distracted by whatever somebody else said you should be doing, all those kinds of things. So I think that naturally stimulates this idea of empathy. Is you just aren't as controlled by what other people think.
That's really interesting. Again, this isn't, I think this isn't new for me, but I think for some people is a little bit difficult to wrap their mind around. So if what I'm hearing from you is correct, if what I'm understanding is accurate, is what I'm trying to say. What you're saying is that self-reliance, i.e. trusting yourself more, understanding your strengths and weaknesses, lessens your perception of other people either as a threat of some kind or someone that you kind of need in order to achieve, whether it is something either extrinsic or intrinsic, so on the outside of you or on the inside of you. It actually, with that kind of removed, it sounds like what's left is a sense of understanding for where that other person is at, which breeds empathy.
Yeah.
Am I kind of connecting the dots properly?
Very much. And let's throw non-judgment into it too, because I think that's the other element that a lot of times, I mean, let's choose an example so many people can relate to. Have you ever been bored one afternoon and thought, I'm just going to check out Facebook? And then you're just like, what an idiot that person is. What an idiot that person is. How can that person share that? I mean, right? It just happens, and because it's there, and I think that's a great example is that I think people who become more self-reliant, just that stuff just doesn't, maybe they don't even get on Facebook as much anymore, but it also doesn't impact them in the same way. There's no frustration, there's no loneliness, there's no depression, that comes from that because, you're not judging yourself as well.
Okay. Yeah. So I like how you've tied together that judging ourselves is really deeply linked to judging others. So if we're judging others, we are, by some extension, judging ourselves because we are judging kind of like how they act in relation to what we value.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be the first person to say this, but a lot of times the stuff that other people do that irritates us the most is secretly something that we do as well that we wish we didn't. Yeah. So
no, I'm again, I'm just kidding. So other than going out and buying your book and making it part of your daily practice, which all of our listeners should definitely consider, what are some ways that people who are interested in increasing their sense of self-reliance or self-awareness, what are some approaches that they could take? If you're not there yet, but would like to walk down that path.
Well, one of the things that I think the transcendentalists were really ahead of their game. I mean, I think it's become kind of standard practice today, but solitude, journaling, meditation, walking in nature. To me, that's like the toolbox, of not just how to be self-reliant, but just how to be more self-aware, how to be happier. And so, I mean, I do. There are multiple entries in here about mindfulness, about meditation, about nature. Nature was, obviously a lot of people relate to Thoreau, in his writings as being one of the earliest naturalists. But they weren't talking about preserving trees because they're beautiful. They were really talking about being connected to nature, realizing that those are living things and that we benefit from being a part of those living things. And to me, that's I have the benefit of living about half of the year in the mountains in a pine forest, and that to me is the best medicine I can take is to go sit under a tree.
Yeah, I can relate to that. As we record this, I'm looking outside my window to the giant cedar trees because I do live in quite a rural area, and that's nice. How I balance things. I'm a 5-10 minute walk from the ocean, and yes, it's the middle of nowhere, and yes, those of you who follow me know that a bear took down my door last week. But a lot of the time, like just walking outside or going for a walk around the block can be meditative in itself. And that's really powerful. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. And it for me, at least, I know, my entire staff is distributed. I'm in my office by myself 95% of the time. And it's really easy to just kind of head down, working on the to-do list. And, 3-4 times a day, I do exactly that. I mean, I force myself to get up, walk around, get outside, even in the dead of winter, because I come back and I'm just, so refreshed and kind of cleared my head. And that's really when you do your best work, I think.
Agreed. Agreed. And I find, especially for myself personally, if I can make time in the morning, that will pay itself forward for the entire day in terms of energy and focus. It really does, even just 20 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I try to be a little more flexible, but I'm definitely a routine person. I get up at 5 a.m. and I do meditate every day, and I do some form of exercise every day, and I journal and I read, and if there are days where I get knocked off of that because I overslept or something like that, then it really does kind of knock me a little bit off my game.
I definitely understand that. And I like the fact that, despite the fact that you do have a more formal morning routine, which I know that many of the people we work with understand the value of, but just haven't been able to make happen for one reason or another. I really appreciate that, when we talked about what are some kind of starting places or practical approaches, you don't have to start, what I'm hearing from you is you don't have to start with this like big, intense routine. Start by just, maybe going for a walk, 10 minutes of meditation, something that can start putting you in that zone. But really what you've emphasized here, John, is smaller steps more often. I think that's powerful.
I think so. I mean, I'm no expert on habit breaking and forming, but I know anytime I got all fired up and I was going to like change my entire like world up, it's just too hard to sustain that much change. But if I could say to myself, for example, this book, if I'm going to get this book and I'm going to put it somewhere where I'm going to stumble over it every morning, so it's right there, in my face, and I'm just going to commit to reading 2 minutes a day for 30 minutes or 30 days. I can commit to doing that. I can, even if I get it 10 days in, and I think, this isn't working, or I don't like this, I'm going to stick with that. And what I find is that by biting off that little thing, you just get a little better every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I don't have any research or references in front of me, but I know that I've been listening to a few podcasts recently, and one of them went into the science around this and totally did back. The interview was with someone who specializes in habits,
Yeah.
and they spoke very specifically about that. How doing a very little something, like, for example, if you want to run a half an hour every day, don't start by running 2 hours or even a half an hour or even 20 minutes. Start with just putting your shoes somewhere you can see them in the morning and maybe 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And make sure you're doing that 2 minutes no matter what. And if there's a day you're not, you can scale up, but if there's a day you're not feeling it, you can always come back to those 2 minutes.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, we've talked so much about like these authors and the application and all this kind of stuff. One of the things that you offered to do was to actually read an entry from the book, in particular, the entry from my birthday, June 13th. So is that something you're still up for?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'll give people a free sample of the book. So yeah, because we've talked in concept, but here it is in practice. So every day has a title and then a chosen reading. Yours is actually from John Burroughs writing, and then 100 words or so from me, and then a challenge question for you today. So June 13th is titled "The Near at Hand." Bees, like us human insects, have little faith in the near at hand. They expect to make their fortune in a distant field. They are lured by the remote and the difficult, and hence overlook the flower and the sweet at their very door. So John Burroughs was a quite noted naturalist, and that's from his essay, An Idyll of the Honeybee, written in 1895. Burroughs, in this bit of introspection, is giving practical advice for the person looking to successfully locate a bee box in an effort to attract a colony to take up residence. But certainly, he's hit upon something relevant for the entrepreneur. To realize your dream as a self-reliant entrepreneur, you must learn to use these words: no, thank you. Or could it be thank you, no? Or even just no? You've intentionally chosen the priorities you need to move your entrepreneurial journey forward, and yet you find yourself taking on projects and tasks for fear that you'll miss an opportunity, or worse, because you lack the courage to say no. Scan your current accountabilities. What should you shed right now? What should you delegate, uncommit to? What goals no longer make sense? Drop them. It's going to be fine. Self-reliance requires wicked self-care. And that starts with protecting the fragile focus you must rely on in order to stay true. Say no to something today just for the practice of it. Your challenge.
Once again, that's June 13th. So that's just my birthday. There's a lot of people that share that, but that was too real.
So your challenge question: what's one task you can delegate right now?
Oh gosh. Do I have to answer?
No, you don't have to answer. Some people answer those questions. Some people just take them into the day with them, and they just kind of show up. When you're thinking about your to-do list, you're going, wait a minute, what's one thing on this to-do list I could delegate?
Honestly, this is so relevant. It reminds me, I'm not going to answer right now about now, but I am going to bank it, chew on it, and fulfill that commitment. You're hearing me say it on air. I'm committing to delegating something today.
Awesome.
But this definitely recently, I've been I trapped even internally. I would say one of my challenges of this year, early in the year, was to start saying no to more client projects. I have an amazing team. That's great. And more recently, I've had to realize that even internally, I tend to think, oh, my team, they need me. In order for me to delegate, in order for me to do things, I have to be at their disposal and in it with them and doing all this stuff. And they themselves have reminded me, as well as the cold, hard baseball bat of life and business and limitations on energy, that you have to say no internally to your team just as much as you have to say no to the demands, some demands from the outside world.
No question. But the bigger thing there is not to get you in the habit necessarily of saying no. I mean,
to everything.
It obviously comes from being very confident about what your goals and objectives and priorities are. And some of that, I mean, I'll be the first to admit, a lot of that comes from the hindsight of experience. We've all been in that situation where we took a client that, the red flags were everywhere, but, said they'd pay us, and we like to sell new work, right? And then, of course, immediately your red flags, pay off, and you were right. That was not a good client. You shouldn't have taken it.
Yeah.
So you learn those lessons a couple times, and you start getting much more comfortable. Not saying no necessarily, but really diving for fit. Really going deeper and asking those harder questions that might actually lose you the sale, but keep you sane. And that's, again, that's one of those things that comes from experience. But it feels a lot better when you aren't just necessarily saying no, you're helping that person understand that you're not a fit. And I think that, when you get to that point, I think it's a lot more joyful, to basically pass on things that, you can't deliver value because it's not the right fit.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And I guess I didn't qualify that. One of my, I guess, strengths these days is that I do have a much, much clearer idea of where my fit is than I previously did in business in any previous year. But there's still sometimes that kind of lingering guilt. And what I'm hearing from you is that a good antidote for that, and a good antidote to kind of understand, maybe if you're feeling some confusion about what you should say yes or say no to, is to orient it around your goals, around your skills. Do your best and know that it's an iterative process, and it's probably, just as your perspective changes, the more you do this, the more you can kind of zero in on what it is that you need to be saying yes to, how to say no to the rest of it, and allow you to actually take joy in that no, rather than perhaps guilt or frustration, because that no is allowing you to say yes to something that is more important. Is that?
Yeah, very, very much so. And I always, a lot of times people say, you want to work with clients you love. And to me, that's only half of it. I want to work with clients that I love who also love what I do. And, that fit is what you're really looking for.
That, I think, is a really good point. Not just clients that you love, but clients who can fully appreciate the value of what it is that you're doing for them, and also love it. That creates that win-win situation. Yeah. Awesome. Well, sorry.
I was going to say, and that's ultimately who you're going to get the most value for, is when it really comes down to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, before we get into our lightning round, is there anything that you wish that I asked that I haven't asked that you perhaps would like to chat about or share?
I don't think so. I mean, we one of the things that you noted that I really appreciate is that I did go very deep. I got into letters and journals and, and things like that, because I think that's where a lot of times the real nuggets are. But I also was really struck by not only how wise a lot of these teachings are, but how relevant they are still for today. I think that, even though we've got all this new technology and platforms and distractions in our lives, I think the human condition is ultimately the same. And the need to connect and to share and to follow our heart. I mean, I don't know that that's ever going to change.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Even what you were saying, a little bit more on the spiritual side, in terms of how we're all one and we're all connected, which for me are practices and beliefs that are they're just part of my day-to-day life. But I think what you just said here is the practical side of that same coin, right? Which is that the human experience, like how our brains work, how we interact with each other, the deeper things that we fear, the deeper things that we desire, those things do remain consistent. And while they might be nuanced from person to person, they are consistent all throughout humanity and all throughout time. And even just in that way, and I think it's far, far more than just in that way, we truly are, connected and overlapping.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Are you ready for our lightning round?
Of course.
Okay. Awesome. So first question, what gets you up in the morning?
Well, I love the morning. I really think that's it. That time period from 5 to 7, depending upon, it's kind of like when day and night, are sort of passing each other. There's just something magical about that time for me, inside, outside, doesn't matter. I love camping. And that's probably one of the reasons I love camping, is that, you really a lot of times experience that, kind of at its fullest. So, that's probably not the answer most people give, but that's my answer.
Well, the fact that it's not the answer most people give makes it all the sweeter to me. And it's an answer I can relate to. I'm that person people are like, oh, wow, you've had your coffee today. And I'm like, I haven't had coffee. I just like mornings. But especially what you said about that like magical time where it's
Yep.
not quite day, it's not quite night.
Yep.
Often there's not a lot of people up too,
Yeah.
which I think is kind of nice.
Yeah. And I have grown children now, but I mean, that was like, for any parents out there listening, that's like the only quiet you might get the entire day.
Yes, I have also heard that. Now, second question. Okay, so what's the number one thing that you personally do to preserve your wellness?
Oh gosh, there seems like so many things, but I think the one that I truly believe pays the most benefits from is I've had a practice of meditation for about 20 years. And I wholeheartedly believe in that from a physical, mental, and spiritual standpoint.
Excellent. And I'm curious for our listeners who are interested, is that something that I know it's supposed to be lightning round, but did you kind of dive into that whole heart? Like, how long do you spend meditating every day? And do you do so 7 days a week?
I do 7 days a week, and not that long, 15 minutes. Which I know is an eternity if you're just trying to start, but not that long, and I do it every day. It's just part of the first thing I do every day, and it's I don't really know how or why I got started, other than a lot of the stuff I read talks about it and talked about it. I'm a big Deepak Chopra fan. So read his books 25 years ago, some of his first works, and that just really got me on it. And, now we've got all these apps, and you can do guided meditations and, all kinds of experiment with all kinds of ways to get into it. But it's something that I really don't let a day go by without.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. And even, 20 years, you listeners, you guys heard it, still 15 minutes a day. That's, I think all of us, even the busiest of us, 15 minutes a day is something we can potentially carve out. And last question, what is the weirdest habit you have that contributes to your success?
Well, I must warn you, I don't have any weird, what people would truly call weird. But one thing I love to do is I love to take books that are completely unrelated to what I do. So it might be about architecture or calculus or something, and read them for business ideas. And so, like I said, it's not that weird. It is really from a innovation standpoint, from a differentiation standpoint. I've gotten some of my best ideas reading about somebody who's talking about how to position houses or buildings in a community. It's amazing if you read it. As an architect, that's what you're going to get out of it. But if you read it as a marketer who's trying to come up with concepts that can make the complex things in business maybe more simple, read completely unrelated stuff, but with an eye on what is this saying to me as an entrepreneur or as a marketer or whatever it is that you do.
I love this. It is so easy to get trapped in our business world, in our little world of, all the different marketing books, or not just marketing, but also just leadership and
Sure.
books and all this kind of
Yep.
stuff. I know my partner is a carpenter, and I'll be honest, I've gotten some of the best insight for my business just from him. He's a carpenter. Most of the people in my life, I live in a rural area, are not computer savvy at all. And sometimes it's amazing how they relate to what I talk about, give me ideas. I'm a talkative person. I can't not talk about work. And even as a leader, I always find that really, really impressive how those kind of outside ideas and perspectives can help me kind of break through.
I'm always bringing up geometry concepts. You think of which carpentry is basically geometry, and if you think about how squares fit together and how complementary angles need to go together and how all these things fit together to form a whole. I mean, there's so many parallels and metaphors in geometry and carpentry, frankly. So I get that.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome. I mean, building a house, because that's what my husband does. He builds houses from ground through to, I think, the lights turning on and locks on the doors. And that's a system, right?
Sure.
That's a system in the same way that what I do is a digital system. So lots of stuff there.
Don't put in the drywall before the plumbing, for example.
Yeah. Yeah. And lots of different moving parts to juggle. And then on a totally different side of things, I'm a huge fantasy nerd and I read a lot of fiction.
Yeah.
And I often find that there's some overlap there as well.
No question.
Anyway, I could literally, I have more questions and all sorts of stuff, and we could keep talking all day, but I do want to respect your time and mine and wind down. Did you want to share with our audience about how they can find out more about you, where they can check out anything you might have for them?
You bet. So if you want to just find more about the book, of course, the book can be purchased anywhere you purchase books. I really recommend this one as a analog version, but there is the electronic versions, the Kindles. There is an audio version as well. So you can buy that anywhere you buy books. And then if you want to find out more about the book, here's some other interviews like this that I've done. They can all be found at Self-Reliant Entrepreneur.com. And if you want to find out the work I've done the last couple decades online, it's just ducttapemarketing.com, which is DUCTTAPE marketing.com.
Yeah, and we will, of course, as always, include all of this in the show notes. I will say that I definitely recommend that you check out some of these interviews if you're curious to hear more, dig into some of these concepts. Quite frankly, even just a little bit of Googling pulled up some interesting kind of perspectives on your work itself, which we're talking about kind of different ways to consume content and get inspired. That can be really cool. But just all in all, this has really been a pleasure. I'll admit I was looking forward to this, but I'm surprised, not because I had low expectations or anything, or, not because I had negative expectations or anything, at just how resonant so much of this and what you've said is for me, both in my personal life and in my business life. And I would love to continue aspects of this conversation at a future date. So just thank you from the bottom of my heart. This has been really, really excellent.
You bet. And we do, I'll throw one final note. I've had a lot of people who've said they want to discuss this and they want to get deeper into it. I mean, you think about, if you have 1,000 people who, for example, are reading this book, well, theoretically, most of them are going to be on the same day at the same time. So I think it does lend itself to, if nothing else, discussing the question and how the question impacted you that day. So we will have, I am planning discussion groups and practices and exercises and worksheets and things of all that to go along with it.
Awesome. Well, definitely let us know when some of that comes out, because I'm sure that our audience would be super interested in accessing that. I know I would, and the team will as soon as they listen to this episode, which they all do. So thank you very much. Just thanks again, John. This has been lovely.
My pleasure.
Awesome. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. And same thing to you, our listeners. And that does it for another amazing episode of the Say It Online podcast. Join us next week. And don't forget to like and subscribe, whether it's iTunes, whatever your favorite podcast player is. It is always, always appreciated. It really makes a difference for us. It helps us get this word out to more people. As always, this episode was brought to you by our sponsor and Say's own business, Anansi Content. If you're a digital agency owner and you're still wasting too much time chasing down content that maybe isn't even all that great, let's talk. We've spent years working on the best process for selling, planning, and delivering amazing conversion content for your client projects. Better yet, we moosh our process to yours so that your client and you have a seamless and amazing experience the entire time through. If you're interested, just go to our website. That's www.anansicontent.com. That's ANANSI content.com. And just click Let's Talk. I'd love to chat with you. Someone else on the team would also love to chat with you too. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day.